they possibly blame him for the destruction.
Possibly, yeah. And Lot and his family have lost their home, their wife, mother. I mean, probably a pretty traumatic experience for them.
Well, and they were very
overall.
wealthy, right? The reason that Lot and Abraham split was because of their servants were fighting. I don't see any servants left with them.
Now, the only thing I can think of is, because I did think about that scenario too, he's living in this city, he's got a home, but I'm sure he still has massive flocks of animals and his servants are probably taking care of them. Were they in the plain when all this came down to? And if that's true, the Bible also says not only did the fire destroy the plants, it killed all the animals too. So Lot may have lost everything he owned, including his wife at the same time too. So notice they escaped to a cave in the mountains on the side, because remember I mentioned this is a valley with mountains on both sides. And they go up, these aren't massive mountains or anything like that, you can scale them, but nonetheless, they did go to that area and they decide to actually live in a particular cave. So, and then the daughters start talking among each other, and this is where it gets weird. What is their idea at this point? What do they decide they want to do?
They need them some babies.
They want some babies. And why didn't they just ask Lot?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we have to go down this path.
No, we don't have to. I think it implies though that Lot would have said no.
Yeah.
In fact, why would you conclude that?
Because they got him drunk.
They had to get him drunk.
And he didn't even remember it.
Yeah, he doesn't remember it, and that is not uncommon if people get really drunk to not remember what they did the night before. That's not uncommon at all. So the deeds were done, and apparently, they were successful and they had children. God doesn't say anything one way or the other about it. I'm sure he wasn't real happy with it, but he
Luckily, there
doesn't.
was no long-term negative implications of it.
Well, for the most part, the Ammonites and the Moabites were perpetual enemies of God's people from here on out. Now, Ruth was a Moabite, so not all of them were bad, but it didn't turn out well for the rest of the Israelites throughout the history of the world from that particular region. So I'm gonna leave that and go on to chapter 20 unless somebody else wants to bring in something. I got the feeling you guys wanna move on. You guys wanna move on?
Okay, we'll move on.
The one thing I can't think of the difference between Lot and Job. I mean, they basically had the same situation happen to him. Job didn't even deserve it. There was nothing he did.
Right.
At least Lot probably deserved a lot of what he got. And look at the difference in reaction.
Yeah.
One relied on God, kept praising God. The other one relied on himself.
Yeah.
So that's where I don't think Lot was in the right
Yeah.
spot with God at all.
It's possible. Now, chapter 20 isn't gonna be necessarily easier to interpret because there is some controversy with chapter 20. And some of you are gonna say, isn't this a repeat of chapter 12? Didn't we already talk about this whole scenario before? Well, I didn't write chapter 20, it's here. Either I skip it or we cover it, but it's a very similar story in some respects to chapter 12. But before I start it, I think I mentioned this a little bit last time when we were studying this. Could somebody just describe the word and give me a definition of the word a paradox? Paradox. What does the word paradox mean in literary terminology? What is a paradox?
Teresa?
Isn't it basically a contradicting statement, but there's truth to it?
Yeah. Is the truth very self-evident, or you have to dig a little bit usually?
Military intelligence is a good example.
That is actually a paradox.
Yeah.
That's not what was it? Thayer used to always describe one too, he'd call it jumbo shrimp. That was his favorite one he liked to mention too, but the word paradox is an interesting term. And the reason I bring it up is because we're gonna find that as you mature in life, you're gonna find some of the greatest truths are paradoxes. On the surface, they don't always make sense because there's contradictory ideas going against each other. If you look at it, there you see two truths, and one it appears to be two truths, one has to be wrong, one has to be right. And that's not always true. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And there's other scriptures that talk about this. There's other people who have made statements too. Have you ever heard the statement, the more we learn, the more we realize how much we really don't know. And that is a very common experience. And people who understand that are beginning to mature in life because they've seen life. Life isn't always that easy to explain as we thought we did at one time. And that's a truth that's brought out by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. He says, now about food sacrificed to idols. That was a thorny issue back then. We know that we all possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know. But the man who loves God is known by God. I always thought there's verse 3 was an afterthought, like it's not that important. Wrong. What's he saying here? The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know. That could be quite a challenging statement. Some of the greatest truths, if somebody made that statement to you, would you like them making that statement towards you? You think you know that. How do you know that's really true? If you think you know something, is it always truth? I know it's an uncomfortable thought, isn't it? It makes you confused a little bit and makes you struggle a little bit sometimes too, but that's the way paradoxes are. Sometimes we think we understand something, but we don't always. And that's part of what chapter 20 is all about too, I think. There's an element, I think, of a paradox in this particular chapter. You decide for yourself. I'm not gonna, this is my thinking, you may think something differently. First off, and I mentioned back in chapter 12, I'm gonna say the same thing again. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. What's in Hebrews chapter 11? What's the point of that chapter?
Faith.
Faith is, and how does it emphasize faith? By naming what? People. And who are the people that it names?
Sarah. Sarah's one of them.
Who?
Sarah's one of them.
Abraham.
And he names people with an action that demonstrated their faith, not just the people, but
Interesting.
it was their action that demonstrated.
Yes, that is very true. And there's almost 20 people, I think, mentioned. Not all of them are mentioned by names, but some of their actions are actually mentioned, but their names aren't. So there's quite a few names written. You know which name is talked about the most in that whole chapter? There's 11 verses on one person. It's Abraham.
Yeah.
There's not one word of condemnation that I have found in the Bible where Abraham never did anything wrong. I know he did. But I can't find it in the Bible, not in the New Testament or Old Testament, where it says Abraham messed up here. Now, there's other people that have said, yeah, Abraham messed up. And that's why we're looking at chapter 20, because a lot of people say, here's where Abraham messed up. Here, and also in chapter 12. So, but is that true? We have a repeated storyline here that we can look at and try to decide, did Abraham and Sarah sin? So let's read the dialogue and see if we come to that conclusion or not. Now Abraham moved on there into the region of the Negev, and between Kadesh and Sur, for a while he stayed in Gerar, And there Abraham said to his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, the king of Gegar, sent for Sarah and took her. Now the title Abimelech is kind of like the title Pharaoh or Caesar, or it's a synonym for the word king. That's not his actual name. Abimelech is his title. So he's the king of Gegar, and Gegar in this particular region where he's at is kind of in between the more northern part of the Philistines. He's actually a Philistine, but he's kind of in between Egypt and the Philistines, which are both enemies of God's people throughout history. So anyhow, Abraham moves south from the trees of Mamre down here in the south, further down, and he probably did it because of, various reasons relating perhaps to his flock, but we don't know for sure, but he moves. And when he gets down there, the king of Gegar does what?
Take Sarah.
Takes Sarah. Now, it's pretty blunt that it says that. He takes her, and you can also look at verse 8, where God mentions the fact, and he says it bluntly also, that you took Sarah. Now, just generally speaking, looking at that, unless there's other explanations, when you see the phrase, he took her, what does that imply?
He didn't ask, he didn't bargain for her, he didn't buy her, he just took her.
And why would he do such a thing?
And she must have been beautiful, like even at this age.
It's funny you said that.
How old was she, John?
She's like
She's-
90
she-
at this point, isn't she?
I didn't say it. Nice try, I didn't say it. She's 90. But she lives to be 127. And not only that, you gotta realize something too. She almost has to maintain some of her vitality because she's gonna give birth in 1 year to a child. So, some person that's suffering the ill effects of old age, I doubt it's gonna be able to handle pregnancy.
90's the new 30 back then.
It's funny. I got curious this morning. I thought, I have seen women. I'm gonna get in trouble.
Jeff, you better.
Don't do it, Jeff.
Don't
go there.
Jeff,
I have seen women
Let's move
in
on.
their
Let's
60s
move
and
on.
70s that do not look that old.
Yeah.
And you can get on the internet, you can see some pictures of famous actresses. And they do not look
Do you
60
see,
years
do you
old.
see,
Botox and surgery, what do you think?
Yeah.
do you see
Don't
him
hold that
every
up
day
as a
when you
standard
wake
to
up?
us.
We move on. Probably go to the beauty salon.
Yeah. So nonetheless, I think Sarah probably still was very attractive.
My footnotes in my Bible say that it may not have necessarily been because of her beauty, but because of her wealth.
Yes.
Oh.
And
She was
her
very
husband,
wealthy.
She was probably also veiled. Might have hidden the wrinkles. So I-
nonetheless, it could have been for a power reason.
Yeah.
It was not unusual for kings to take wives and exchange daughters for power reasons. That is not unusual, but the word took is still there. I don't like that word. And I don't think God liked it either, because he mentions it a couple verses later where he says, you took her.
But interestingly, he didn't take her without first inquiring or somehow knowing that she was his sister.
Yeah.
He did not know she was his wife, because he also makes that defense, I'm innocent.
Yeah, now, that is true, but does that still mean he asked for her to take her?
No,
I don't think it proves that point, because if he would have said to Abraham, may I take Sarah? Would Abraham have said, yeah, sure, go ahead? I don't think so. I don't think the question was ever answered. He just says, oh, she's single? Okay, I want her. See ya. And he's got soldiers with him probably. And he took her. And Abraham's like, they're sitting there going, what am I gonna do? Either I go to war and draw the sword, and not only that, that Sarah is involved in this deception too, if you wanna call it a deception. But she has, made the decision, because she loves her husband, to protect her husband by telling these stories.
Well, I was just gonna say though, Abraham was wrong just from the beginning again, in that he wasn't honest. If he'd have been honest and said she was my wife, he said she was my sister. So, I mean, he was being, there again, he was being dishonest again. It doesn't say anywhere where he was being threatened. He lied and said it was his sister.
Well, I'm not sure it's that simple. I think it's much more complicated, I think, than
Well,
that.
but he still said it was his sister.
He did, is that a lie?
No, she wasn't, she was.
Did he
yeah.
lie?
No, I guess not.
No.
We gotta be careful here, he never, there's no record that he actually lied. Now, some say it's a half-truth.
Yeah.
Is a half-truth still a lie? Not necessarily. Go ahead, Glenn.
No, that's what I was gonna say. He didn't lie, he just didn't tell all the truth. He didn't tell the backdrop behind everything.
No, he didn't do that. Dan?
Wasn't they had the same father but different mothers?
That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Same father, different mothers.
So technically it could be a sister.
It is true, she is his half-sister.
I think God was using it as a wealth transfer plan, because it works out the same way this time as it did last time.
I think that could possibly be true, but I think there's another aspect of that, why God is using this story here. Abraham has just moved to a totally different region. These people don't know Abraham. Does God want to protect Abraham?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Has God gotten the attention of the Philistines and the Negev from this point on?
Yep.
Oh boy, does he. They aren't gonna mess with Abraham anymore after this point. He got their attention.
I think you're right, that might have been his plan all along to change Abimelech's heart more than anything else.
Yeah.
So that he can, because he's the ruler. So he's the big man, so what he says, everybody else is gonna follow in that lane.
I don't think he is as godless as Pharaoh was either in Egypt.
Yeah, he responds.
Yeah, he seems to respond a little bit, so this is a guy that's reachable, I think, and perhaps to a certain extent, I don't know how far it goes. But, so, anyhow, let's start reading verse 5, because this is interesting. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead, because the woman you have taken, she is a married woman." That's pretty blunt, isn't it? You are as good as dead. Now Abimelech had not gone near her. He said, "Lord," which is interesting, he uses that term, Lord, "will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And didn't also she say, he is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Why is God all over this guy's case?
Yeah, it changes heart.
There's more to the story, there always is. God got his attention though, we'll say that. Verse 6, and then God said to him in the dream, this is strange. "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience, so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a" what? Prophet, first time that word's ever used in the Bible. "And he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die." So, this is strange. He says, "Yeah, I know you did this with a clear conscience. I know you did. But what did God do to make sure that she wasn't violated?"
Well, he protected her.
Interceded in some way,
Protect both of them.
kept him from her.
Yes.
Somehow he kept him from her.
Right.
Whether he changed, I think he had to do something mentally to him, to the effect that he didn't try to approach Sarah for sexual stuff. So whatever it was, God did something to prevent that.
The other thing that's interesting is this same area that he's in, God was setting this area up because when the Israelites were roaming the desert, this is the area they went.
Yeah,
This is actually where Moses struck the rock,
yeah,
because it was an area you could live, it had enough resources.
it did.
So it's kind of interesting, I kind of wonder if some of this isn't a setup to allow them to come back, however many years that is.
Yeah.
600 years later,
Yeah.
and stay there.
Now, everybody says Abraham is a liar. Okay, I got commentaries. I read some of these last time. And I don't always agree with commentaries. This is James Burt Kaufman, who's well known in our brotherhood. He's from the Church of Christ, and this is what he has to say. And I don't agree with him. This was no imaginary danger that Abraham confronted, but the patriarch's sinful efforts to protect himself appear here in a very unfavorable light. This has been called the low point in the life of Abraham, and some have registered surprise that this shameful event should have been related in the same chapter, and I mentioned this last time, that the glorious promise to the father of the faith. And this is a lesson for the chosen people. You know, right after this happened in chapter 12, God names all these blessings for Abraham after he supposedly lied, according to Burton Kaufman, and gives him all these blessings. Does that make sense?
No.
Does it make sense here that he has this guy's wife and he's chewing the guy out who with a clear conscience, and supposedly Kaufman said he lied? God doesn't say a word to Abraham, does he? He's all over Abimelech. So he goes on and on about this. Let's see, there's another section too. He says, this is merely the second offense of Abraham after this manner, but it was just another outcropping of what had been a regular procedure by him and Sarah throughout the many years of their wanderings, as indicated in verse 13. The inference may easily be made that this device, wicked and sinful though it was, has been deployed frequently, and at most of the times they have found it effective. Do you want to call Abraham wicked and sinful after chapter 11 of Hebrews? Now, I'm not saying Abraham's perfect. I'm not saying that. But is there any scripture that says Abraham sinned? And to show you that God doesn't ignore this stuff when Abraham and Sarah have stuff that's going on, do you remember what happened back in chapter 18 when God came with the two other angels and spoke to Abraham, and the angel made a promise to Abraham that next time this year, for a year from then, what was going to happen? Sarah was going to have that child. What was Sarah's reaction? She laughed.
Disbelief.
And then the angel said to Sarah, said, "Why did you laugh?" And Sarah,
I didn't laugh.
I didn't laugh. And what did the angel say?
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did. Does God ever confront Sarah when she sins?
Yes.
Yes. And this is something that you could easily see that God is not ignoring stuff. He has his reasons for doing everything he does. So why doesn't he condemn them here at this point? He's all over Abimelech's case. So let's read on. Verse 8, early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when they told him all that had happened, they were very much afraid. And Abimelech called Abraham in and said, what have you done to us? You have wronged, how have I wronged you that you brought such great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should not be done. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason for doing this? Abraham replied, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wandering from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. that Abimelech brought sheep and cattle, male and female slave, gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah, his wife, to him. Abimelech said, this is interesting, my land is before you, live wherever you like. Does he kick him out of the country? Nope. To Sarah he said, I am giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you and you are completely vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God cursed Abraham. Oh, sorry. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech. Oh, God listens to the prayers of sinners and heals people from sinners' mouths? I'm sorry, I'm being sarcastic. His wife enslaved girls so they could have children again, for the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife Sarah. Now, when you look at chapter 21, surely God's still mad, right? Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. At the same time God had promised him. Abraham gave him the name Isaac, and the son Sarah bore him. And when his son was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet have borne him a son in his old age? So, all that dialogue, does God say Abraham or Sarah sinned? It doesn't necessarily prove the point. Well, what are some of the action God takes towards Abraham? Abraham prays. Does God listen to him?
Yeah. He listened to him. He blessed him.
Yeah.
I don't think he'd bless him if he was upset with him.
No, I don't think so either. What about Sarah? Is he mad at Sarah? It said he's gracious to her and gave her her son that she wanted from the very beginning. So, however you look at this, to say that it's a sin that they committed, I'm going back to my paradox thing. Is it a sin to lie?
Depends.
But you keep.
Oh, at least I got a depends
You
now.
said, though, that he didn't lie. He did not lie.
Would you agree with that? Did Abraham and Sarah lie?
No,
Is it a half-truth?
they didn't tell the entire truth.
They didn't tell the entire truth, but is that a sin to not tell the entire truth?
It didn't come up.
Did he lie? If you want to say he lied, did he lie to deceive them
No.
or cause Abimelech harm necessarily? Not really. Whose skin was he trying to save?
No.
His own. Why?
Because he feared that godless people would kill him for his life.
Yeah. And I told last time we studied this chapter, back in chapter 12, the midwives who were told by Pharaoh to kill all the firstborn Israelite boys. Did the midwives listen to Pharaoh?
Nope.
Nope. They feared God more than Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked them, where are all these dead baby boys? And they said, well, the Hebrew wives are more vigorous than the Egyptians, and they give birth before we can even get there. A lie, and that is a lie. Then God goes on to say in the next verse, God blessed those midwives, tells you their names, and gives them their own families after they lie. Also, too, you look in 1 Kings chapter 22. God puts a lying spirit out there to lie to Ahab, so God can kill him. That was the intent of the lie. God wanted to kill Ahab, so he sent God put a lying spirit into this guy so that he would lie to Abraham. Also, too, the most telling one, the one that's the closest story to this whole thing, is in 1 Samuel 16. Samuel is interrupted by God. God comes to him and says, I want you to go to Bethlehem. I want you to go to a family, and there's a family there, and I want you to anoint a new king for Israel. Samuel goes, are you kidding? If I go there, Saul's gonna kill me. For anointing a new king, Saul will kill me. God said, go. So he goes. As soon as he gets there, the people get scared because they see Samuel, and they ask, are you here for peace? And he says, yes. I'm here to make sacrifices to God. Is that why he's really there? No. He's there to anoint David as the new king. He is not there for sacrifices. But he tells the people that for what reason?
Preserve his life.
To save his life, to save David's life, so Saul won't figure this out. Because if Saul figures out what he's doing there, he'll kill them all. And he did that later on with David in an incident later on. Saul's a butcher. So Samuel lies with the blessing of God because God tells him to do it.
And, Matthew talks about be wise as serpents. He's telling people to be wise as serpents when they deal with stuff. We know what the serpent was. He was lying. So I don't know if you could parlay that in there, but there are definitely some, God wants us to use wisdom to try to, and I can't help but ask, because I saw this t-shirt one time, it was the worst t-shirt I've ever seen. If maybe Abimelech got a new boat, because I saw a t-shirt and it said, I got a new boat for my wife. It's the best trade I ever made.
And the last example I'm
Julie,
gonna
just
give,
hit him. Hit him for all of us.
the last example I'm gonna give is when the spies came to the land of Israel, when Moses sent them out, they enter Jericho. When they enter Jericho, they take residence with a woman by the name of who? Rahab. She finds out what's going on. She's afraid of God. She respects God. And there's the people in the city were scared of the Israelites. And she decides that there's soldiers outside her house banging on the door, wanting to come inside because they heard the spies are in her house. She hid them under a stack of flax up on her roof. When they came in, where are the spies? What does she tell them?
They went that way.
They're not,
They went that way. And not only that, she says, if you hurry, you can catch them. Bold-faced, flat-out lie. Guess whose name is in the Hall of Fame in chapter 11? Rahab. She lied. Why does God allow it in these cases? Now here, this is on the other end of trying to understand this paradox. Why does God allow this? What do wicked people do with truth? Twist it for what purpose?
Their own thing.
Their own gain to destroy. Does God let them get away with that? Absolutely not.
Well, it says in Matthew 16, Jesus says, behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents.
Yeah.
So, the reason is because you're dealing with people that are godly.
Yeah. And Ahab wanted to hear lying prophets. God said, fine, I'll give you a lying prophet, and it's gonna be your doom. And he did. He used the truth again, he used a lie that he wanted to destroy him. So we gotta understand something too, like if somebody pounds on your door in the middle of the night and wants to, rape your children, are you gonna say, yeah, they're upstairs? Or are you gonna lie?
I lied.
Will God condemn you for lying? Absolutely not. See, these are paradoxes. These are things that there's more to truth than sometimes we realize. There's scenarios that we can't always figure out. Is it a sin to lie? Yes. In vast majority of the cases, it is a sin. But boy, you better have a real good reason if you're gonna lie. And in all these cases we just brought up, these are really good reasons for not telling wicked people the truth.
I think a lot of times, it depends on your intent when you lie. If you're lying for self-gain and self-enhancement, you're out of luck. But if you're lying to protect somebody that's innocent, that needs the protection, God will forgive you for that lie. It's all tied up in your intent and your judgment or the reasoning why you did lie.
Yeah. And also too, there's an element of human nature too, because I've been actually trying to study this just a little bit on the side, that some of us tend to be a little bit more rigid in our thinking, a little bit more legalistic in our thinking. And I'm not necessarily saying that's all bad, because it's not. Because rules are important, and a lot of people who tend to be, it tends to be our natural personality sometimes, that we sometimes want to stick to the rules and stick to the law. And that's not all bad. But at the same time too, that we must realize the paradoxes in life. The people who are sometimes the most balanced are people who stick to the truth, but realize there are circumstances that might change the whole scenario. And we have to understand that too, because that's a deeper truth. And that's why legalists usually end up in trouble, because they go too far. Same thing can be true of people who are overly liberal. They can go too far in the other direction and not respect the laws that God has. So there's a balance in all of this. So we're out of time. Any final questions?
No, 2 minutes.